Good morning. My name is Linda Zarrow. This morning I'm going to be interviewing the survivor, Henry Morgenstein. Today is October 11th, 2022. We're in New York City, and I'm going to be conducting this interview in English. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Please tell us your name.
Henry Morgenstein.
Do you have a middle name?
No.
Okay. Henry, when were you born, please?
May 14th, 1938, in Antwerp, Belgium.
You were born in Belgium. And please tell us who the members of your immediate family.
There was my sister, who was 5 years older than I am, who was 5 years older than I, my brother, who is 10 years older than I, my mother, and my father.
All right. Your father's name was?
Shoah Morgenstein. Shoah Zalman Morgenstein.
Okay. And what year was he born?
He was born in 1903.
Your mother?
1907.
And her name?
Her name is Sarah.
What was her maiden name, please?
Sarah Siegel.
Sarah Siegel. Could you spell Siegel, please?
S-E-G-A-L.
G-A-L. Okay. And your brother's name?
Paul Morgenstein.
And he was born in?
Antwerp, Belgium.
Also in 1929, is that correct?
I think it was 1928.
28. And your sister's name?
Miriam, 1933.
33. And you had a very large extended family. Your father was one of how many children?
11.
And do you have any knowledge of the earlier children? I know that a lot of the information that you give us is about the last 4 of the 11 children. Do you have any knowledge of the others?
I know of them. I know where they are. I know where they went to, but I did not interact with them because they were so much older than I. There was one, my father's brother, Giel Morgenstein, who was my father's lifelong business partner. His family we knew very well as Kaufmans. My father's sister, Humcha, married a Kaufman. So those families, and Tzipora, who was another child. The last 4 children were Tzipora and Humcha, Giel, and my father, Shlomo.
I think you're going to have to spell those for us. Humcha?
Humcha, of course, is a transliteration. C-H-U-M-T-Z-E. She was the father, and she took care of my brother, as you will find out later in the story.
Okay.
So those families were very close, and I knew them and interacted with them, and in a couple of cases lived with Giel Morgenstein's family and with Humcha's family.
So these were of the last 4 of your grandmother's children?
Yep.
Okay. Henry, you were a baby during all of this. You were born, as you say, in 1938. So where have you gotten the information of the story you're about to tell?
At one point, I decided to become the family historian. So I went from uncle to uncle and cousin to cousin and asked for their recollections of the story. The one major source I had was Humcha's son called Paul Kaufman. So there was Big Paul and Small Paul. And Paul Kaufman had a photographic memory, truly a photographic memory. He remembers conversations, he remembers the boats he took. Much of what I wrote was based upon what he told me. But I also interviewed Giel, I also interviewed Tzipora, I interviewed as many as I could get hold of.
How old was Paul during the years of your family's escape?
He was, if I was 2, he was 7, and... Sorry. No. If I was 2, he was 12.
Okay.
When he escaped and went to England, he had his bar mitzvah in London. So I know exactly his age at that time.
All right. So during the period that we're going to be discussing, he was approximately 12.
That's correct.
Okay.
He had to be 12. I was 2. He's 10 years old.
Okay. Okay. And where was your family originally from?
Poland. The whole family was from Poland, and they ran away from Poland to Antwerp, Belgium. When I mean the whole family, I mean they started emigrating right after or almost before the end of World War I. They started immigrating to Antwerp, Belgium. It was 1919 when the first one of them went there, and 1921 when my uncle Giel went there. And after he became an apprentice in the diamond trade and was earning enough money, he brought over my father, Shlomo. So it was a gradual migration of the entire family, Chomche, Paul, all of them, to Antwerp, Belgium, which became the diamond capital of the world because of so many Jews coming there.
Let me go back to Poland for a moment, please. Did any of the people that you spoke with talk about why your family left Poland when they did?
They made it very clear they didn't like Poland. My father refused to speak Polish after he came to Antwerp, Belgium. I never heard him say a single Polish word. They knew Poland was the land of pogroms. That's where Jews were killed with great regularity and with no explanation. So the minute World War I was over, they made firm plans to get away from Poland. Poland has a long history of being kind to Jews. I could go into that. But they also were very cruel to Jews, and it was time to go.
Did they themselves ever experience any pogroms that you know of?
Not that I know of. I mean, I know that they felt uncomfortable, but no, they were in very small towns, and they didn't ever mention that they were particularly targeted by the Poles. Again, to give you some sense of it, at one point I asked my Uncle Giel how many non-Jews were in the town. He said, what? I said, how many non-Jews? He said, there were no non-Jews. The entire town was Jewish. The non-Jews came in on weekends or other times and bought things from us, and we bought things from them. But the town, which was...
What was the town? What was the name of it?
That must be Rozan.
Can you spell that, please?
Rozan. There is a history of Rozan which lists the number of Jews that were there in each decade. But yes, they were in Rozan. There was no running water. There was no toilets, of course, no electricity. It was in the 20s when they finally received modern conveniences.
But by the 20s, your family had already started heading to Antwerp.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us what you know about your family's life in Antwerp?
Yes. All the pictures that they gave me, and I was too young to remember, is of going out to the park with maids and of living a good upper middle class life. They were living extremely well, had maids, everybody had their own personal maid, and the diamond business was thriving at the time. We were among the upper class, the well-to-do people in Antwerp, Belgium, and it was a small community of Jews who kept to themselves. They hardly ever interacted with other people. I've looked at the details of how many Jews actually were in Antwerp at the time, but there are varying figures, but it's well upwards of 1 in 10 people. It's 20,000 people or more, maybe 40,000 were in Antwerp, Belgium.
Okay, so you had quite a good life there.
A very good life. We did not want to run away, and we had run away from Poland, and no other country would accept us because we were Polish citizens. Even though we lived in Antwerp, Antwerp handed out only 5% of the Jewish community in Antwerp, Belgium, was Belgian. They did not want us to become Belgian. So we had this undesirable passport, Polish. We were Polish people, theoretically.
So you're saying that Belgium welcomed the Jews, but would not give you citizenship status?
Absolutely correct.
Do you know why that was?
No.
Did you feel... You say that you stayed, it was a small community of Jewish people, you stayed amongst yourselves. Was there anti-Semitism that you felt from outside of the community?
Again, I don't remember.
Okay.
So there's no memory, I have no sense of it.
And nothing that was ever expressed by your family?
No.
Life was good?
Life was very good.
Okay. What language did you speak in Belgium?
Well, in the family, within the house, always Yiddish. I spoke Yiddish to my parents, I spoke it, but I'm a little child, I have maids, and I'm sure that the maids spoke Flemish and French. In adulthood, I recognize French and I recognize Flemish. There's a trace memory. I can't speak French, I can't speak Flemish, but it's there. So when I was growing up, I was speaking French, Flemish, and Yiddish.
No Polish?
No, no.
No Polish. Okay. And you had Polish passports, you say.
Yes.
And how did that make life more difficult?
It made life more difficult if you wanted to go anywhere else. It made life more difficult when we tried, as I found out, to cross the border. They said to my uncle, go fight in the Polish army. Polish army? He had left Poland eons ago, but they thought, he has a Polish passport, this is World War II, fight for Poland. So it was a real drawback not to have Belgian citizenship, but to have citizenship in a country that I guess did not rate very highly with other countries.
Okay. Now, you were successful business people. Your family were successful in the diamond business.
Yes.
What did they didn't just sell to Jews, did they?
Just about. The whole diamond
yes?
is...
Okay.
Yeah, in fact, if you can't say muzzle and bracha, you never make a deal. That's the final words you say when you make a deal. So even when there were non-Jews in the community, and there were very few, if any, it was always business conducted in Yiddish. We're in Antwerp, Belgium, business conducted in Yiddish. Everything is in Yiddish.
So the diamond business was primarily Jews, for Jews.
Yes.
And Yiddish was the business language.
The diamond business allowed them to keep Jewish holidays. Since all of them were Jews, Friday afternoon, you close up, nobody does any business. Nobody does any business on Saturday. It was the perfect business for Jews.
And you stayed amongst yourselves. I would think that there would be non-Jews who would buy from you or who would...
Hardly any.
Hardly any, okay. And you mentioned that it was a good business for Jews. You were able to observe the holidays. Were you told that your family was religious or observant?
My father was not religious before World War II. What happened was he turned religious after World War II. He was known as sort of a non-believer, but the war turned him into a believer. So, for instance, my older brother Paul was not raised in a Jewish fashion. Neither was my sister, in a Jewish fashion. They didn't emphasize Judaism. With me, my father sat me down to study the Torah every Saturday. He turned Orthodox Jew when World War II was over.
So not in Antwerp. You were not religious while you were in Antwerp.
We went to synagogue. We stayed with the Jewish community. But my mother, even in Cuba and further on, she turned on lights on Saturday. My father turned a blind eye to it. But my father tried to keep religious. One little thing that is in my mind, I laid tefillin until I was 13. My father did not. When I was 13, I stopped. He started.
All right, but let's go back to Antwerp for a minute. So you went to synagogue.
Yes.
And a lot of the other Jews, I would assume, did as well?
Yes.
Okay, so and that was how the Jewish community
yes.
pretty much observed.
It was a closed community. It wasn't a ghetto, but in the sense that many of us lived next to each other, we were in a ghetto. Again, I realized late in life that no non-Jew, except the maid, walked through the doors of my apartment building until I was 22 years old.
Really?
We kept ourselves to ourselves. We did not make friends with non-Jewish people.
Even though Belgium was welcome?
Even though Belgium was welcome.
You were welcome to do business there?
Yes, and in New York City. We're welcome. No non-Jews in the community.
Okay. So you were in Belgium from approximately 1920 to 1939?
Correct.
Okay.
1940, really.
All right. And when did your family leave Antwerp?
1940. Henry, happy birthday. May 10th, 1940, the Germans attacked Antwerp, Belgium. It was 4 days before my second birthday, rather memorable. I don't remember it, but the answer is it was definitely May 10th, 1940, when they attacked, and we ran away from Antwerp, Belgium, May 12th or 13th. Haskell Kaufman and his family ran away May 10th. And I can tell you where we ran away to, but we ran to La Panne.
Yes, we will get to La Panne, but I am curious that this was 1940. Kristallnacht had already occurred. I know you have no memory of it, but later on, did your family ever speak about it, of their reaction to it, of what the Jewish community in Antwerp might have said or reacted to it?
Yes, we were scared. Many people were scared. I was told a story of somebody who was walking around in Antwerp, Belgium, and saw boots in a window. And they said those would be great boots to run away in. This was after Kristallnacht, but before the Germans attacked. Another one said, why aren't we running away now? Why would those be good boots to run away in later? Part of the answer is nobody accepted Jews. The whole world didn't accept Jews and didn't accept Jews with Polish passports. And there's a little other twist. La Panne, or De Panne, was on the very edge of Antwerp, of Belgium. And during World War I, the Germans did not attack La Panne. So we already had plans to escape to La Panne. So we knew it's dangerous. But we didn't know where in the world we could go because no one accepted Jews. So you could run away, but where to? You don't have the papers, you don't have the money. I mean, you have the money, but you don't have the papers to go anywhere. So though we were afraid, we did nothing.
Okay. Was there a feeling that perhaps because you were upper middle class and living a good life, that perhaps it wouldn't happen there?
No, it wasn't that it wouldn't happen there, but we really thought that if we went to La Panne, the Germans would leave us alone. Why bother with this little town on the edge of Belgium? Of course, that was stupid thinking. When the Germans came, they conquered everything. But we went and ran to La Panne in the belief that we could live all of World War II in La Panne.
Was La Panne a resort town?
So I'm not sure. It was on the sea, so probably it was a resort town. And as I found out from others, some took 6-month leases for apartments in La Panne. They thought, we're here for the duration. They didn't think they'd have to run away a few days later.
Okay. Do you know how long your family spent in La Panne?
Yes. The point is, it was roughly a week in length, or 10 days maybe at most. We went to La Panne.
How did you get there? Excuse me.
Taxis.
Okay. How far was it from Antwerp? Do you know?
No, I don't
Hours by taxi?
No.
Oh.
It was maybe 30 miles, 40 miles away, something of that kind. But yes, you hire a taxi and you go to La Panne. And my brother told me the first few days when we were in La Panne, the troops were coming through, heading towards the battlefront. 2 days later, the troops were running to the coast to be evacuated, and he knew we're not going to be able to last here, and everybody knew. So after about 7-8 days, I tried to work out the timeline, but not much more than 10, probably less, we headed for the border.
And how did you do that?
At that point, no taxis were available. What we did is, it's the standard refugee. You trudge along with all your goods, heading for the border, which was perhaps 4 or 5 miles away from La Panne. So it's very close by. But we just took all our belongings that we could carry and headed to La Panne. Headed to the border.
And at this point, you were, I'm going to say Shlomi's family, because that is your father and your immediate family. But you were still with your larger family at that point?
Yes.
Who were
yes.
you with at that point?
Oh,
Was
it'd
it
be a long list, but it was, of course, Henry Morgenstein, my father's lifelong business partner, and his wife, Charlotte, and their son, Big Henry, and Ruthie. They were with us, but they got split from us. But there were also the Kaufmans were with us, the Schwergolds, which are just friends. There were many people, because as I will say later on, 50 Jews from Antwerp, Belgium, hid in a basement in Calais. So all those people were around us as we were escaping.
So you were walking from La Panne to France with a large group of friends and family.
Yes.
And walking with whatever you could take. All right. At this point, though, I think you say your family had to split apart.
Yes.
Why was that?
We were walking along the road, and there were vehicles coming through, and some of them were picking up women and children. We can't be sure. There's been some discussion on, was it British vehicles? Was it just farm carts? I think it was a farm cart, whatever it is. They're my father and my brother, adult men, and then 2 children, my sister, 7, me, 2, and my mother. we were picked up by somebody in a vehicle, and we made plans to meet either in Dunkirk or Calais. I'm not sure. But the point is, we were heading to evacuate. So we made plans to meet there, but we were split up. There's some other stories on the road. One story was a friend of my father's managed to get a car, but my father said, I don't think he can drive. So we got in the car, and he weaved all over the road and finally ended up in a ditch. So there were friends there trying to escape as we were, but we got split. So there was my father and my brother walking along, and they walked all the way to Dunkirk. Dunkirk and Calais. And us by vehicle to Dunkirk and then Calais.
So your mother and the two small children were separated from your father.
Yep.
And that must have been terrifying.
Yes, it was. I mean, people got separated all over the place. My Uncle Gil was separated from his wife. We were separated from my father, but we did everything we could to try to get away when we could.
Were you able to meet up in Calais?
Yes, all those things are so strange. But when you have a community running away, each of the members of the community lets the other, oh, I saw your father and such, oh, I saw your son over there. In fact, at one point, somebody scribbled on a blackboard, your wife is now in Bologna. So everybody it's sort of a system for getting in touch with each other. So we knew where the others were, but how my father met my mother in Calais, absolute chance, not that. Somebody said, I saw your mother here, I saw your father there, and they fell into each other's arms when they met again, but that's later in the story. Yeah.
All right. Now, so here you are in Calais, unfamiliar with Calais, I would imagine. What is happening in the town?
As far as I know, we went to Dunkirk and then to Calais. And in both places, the beaches were full of soldiers and planes were strafing sinking boats. I mean, everybody knows about the evacuation from Dunkirk. Well, when we came to Dunkirk, my mother thought, no, we'll get killed if we try to get on the boats. So she didn't try there. She thought, I'll go to Calais. She went to Calais, and even there, lots of bombing, no way of getting on boats, so she was scared. So she and I and my sister went inland with a British convoy. I'm not sure about the British convoy, but we went inland in the direction of André or Arde. A-R-D-E-S.
Yes, but let's go back to Calais for a minute. You had spoken about a lot of bombing, a lot of shelling here. How long was your family in Calais?
My sister remembers overnight.
Just overnight?
Just overnight. Sorry, that was the first time. We came back to Calais later, but the first time when we ran away from Calais and went inland, it was one night, overnight. My mother thought, no, I'll leave. She then changed her mind and came back to Calais, and that's when she met my father. But initially, she just left.
But you were in a cellar. You were in a cellar?
Ah, yes, my sister remembers. Oh, wait, that's the second time she came back to Calais that we were in the cellar. The first time my sister remembers they slept somewhere. She was on a table. It was hard, but we were sheltering from the bombing, etc. But we stayed only one night in some place.
Okay. You were caught by a German soldier.
No, not.
No, if I'm mistaken, a German soldier told you to march out of town, and another German soldier told you which direction.
Let me back up. So my mother went inland. Then she decided she has to find her husband. She's going to risk going back to Calais, and it's at that point that I'm sure it was British transport was heading from where my mother was, 20 miles away, 10 miles away, to Calais. So she got on, she pleaded with the British. They let her on there with me and my sister. We got to Calais. There we were told everybody is hiding in a basement. Go to the basement where 50 Jews are hiding. Basement. People ran away from Calais, but they left basement doors open. They locked their front doors, but they left basement doors open. So they found an open basement, all the Jews running away together, found an open basement, and they went there and stayed in that basement for, according to my Uncle Gil, at least 24 hours, no food, no water. Small little story, they needed to go to the bathroom. One of my uncles, it was Uncle Benno who was with us. I'll talk about him later. He was very handy, and he managed to pry open the cellar door going to the main house, so we were able to go to the bathroom there. But for 24 hours, no food, no water, in the basement in Calais. And we were very scared. So my uncle Giel stuck his head out the basement door, and then he saw the Germans marching in, the conquering heroes. The German soldiers saw my Uncle Giel stick his head out. He went there, he told everybody in the basement, "Alle raus, all of you out." They all went out of the basement, and my father said, "I'm sorry, I forgot my hat. Can I go get my hat?" The German said, "You won't need your hat." My father thought, and everybody else thought, we're being marched off to be killed. Only dead people don't need their hats. So we get out of the basement, start walking, and we're being marched along by the Germans. And a little detail is my cousin Paul Kaufman thought that they killed every 10th person. So he kept counting to make sure he wasn't the 10th person. In any case, then we got to a crossroads, and we asked the German, which way do we go? There are several stories, but basically the German said, "You can go to the devil as far as I'm concerned. I'm through with you." At that point, a German soldier at that crossroads said, "Don't go left. If you go left, Gravelin, lots of fighting going on there. Go right," which is where my mother had been before, Andre, Arde. There it is safe. So there was a kind German soldier, saw women and children, directed us away from the fighting. And indeed, I did research. Lots of fighting was going on in Gravelin.
I have to stop you here, Henry. You've two kind acts by German soldiers in a short period of time. We don't hear about that very often. So why do you think, here we were, where were we? Calais, France, German soldiers, and two very lucky or kind incidents? Do you...
The truth is that there are kind people on both sides of the war. They didn't want to do what Hitler asked them to do. They wanted, I mean, who knows what they wanted, but in essence, human beings acted like human beings, and some of them were kind and said, "Don't do this because it'll be very dangerous for you." For the first part of the war, the Germans were not actively persecuting or killing Jews. They didn't know we were Jews. We were just people walking along.
Yeah. It's surprising incidents, and especially in, we are talking about 1940, 41 here. Okay.
I mean, I know several other incidents of that kind.
Yes, there were several in your story. All right, so you were the German soldier, the kind German soldier, directed you away from the fighting and the danger. Where did your family head?
We headed to a farm. The farmer's name was Kehan. We headed towards, as I said, Andre, and we were told there was a farm nearby where a farmer had allowed French soldiers to sleep. So we thought, we'll try this farm, see whether the farmer will allow us to stay there. And he did. We were there 2-3 weeks in this farm. He received no payment from us, asked for no payment. We went and we got our rations. That's another story. But in essence, we were lying low, not sure of what is going to happen next.
How many people were you at this point?
At this point, there was maybe a dozen, maybe 20 in the immediate family. Giel, whose wife had been to Bologna but heard about us and joined us. So Giel and his family, us, the Kaufman and their family, and Uncle Benno and his 2 twin children.
And how did the farmer put you up? Where were you?
In a barn, sleeping on the hay. And sleeping with the rats, my sister said. And my grandmother was there too, Bubishi, and she, again, from Paul Kaufman, the answer is she didn't want to eat any of the food because it wasn't kosher. Paul Kaufman made sure that whatever got to my grandmother was within the realm of kashrut because she was religious. So we stayed there a couple of weeks, and the story was, the reason the farmer told us to leave was Uncle Benno, whom I just mentioned, had a son, Marcel, who was rather boisterous. and he had lots of fun fights with the farmer's son. But at one point, he threw the farmer's son into the river. And at that point, Paul Kaufman said, I think we're leaving tomorrow.
Okay.
And sure enough, by the next day, the farmer said, I think it's time for you to go back to Antwerp, Belgium.
Okay.
And that was what happened. Namely, we didn't realize it, but they just said, go back home. Go lead normal lives in Antwerp, Belgium.
Who said? Who said go back home?
The decrees. The decree was, everybody go back to where you came from. Don't stay in farms. Don't hide from us. Just go back home.
Now, I'm a little confused when you say the decrees. You heard this from government, or was it just here? Well, of course, you were an infant. Was it just hearsay? People were saying, you know, it's safe now in Belgium. We're welcome back in Belgium.
I really don't know.
You don't know. Okay. So you returned to Antwerp. Your family returned to Antwerp, and this was around when?
The bombing occurred May 10th. It was June. In other words, we were on the run for almost a month, 3 weeks, and 2 weeks with that farmer, 2 weeks beforehand in La Panne and running. So it was roughly a month that we were away from Antwerp, Belgium, and then we just came back to Antwerp, Belgium.
So roughly summer 1940.
Yes, June.
And then you stayed until May 1941. So
That's right.
A little less than a year back in Antwerp. And tell me a little bit about your lives there.
Okay. It's very hard to explain the situation because basically we led normal lives. Every morning, my father and my uncle went to work, did the work there. They were not harassed. Yes, we were told we could not go out in the evenings. There was a curfew. No Jewish star yet. The Jewish star came after we escaped from Antwerp, Belgium. But there were restrictions on behavior and restrictions on what we could do. But basically, we were not aware of the Germans and their presence and the fact that they were now in charge rather than the Belgians. There were certain incidents. For instance, my sister remembers at one point she had to go out in the evening because my father had to deliver some goods to my Uncle Gil. He could not go out. They would have searched him. There was a curfew. He would not be allowed to. But he told my sister, you're 7 years old. They're not going to stop you. Just get on the train, go to the uncle, hand him what I gave you, and then come back. And she remembers being very scared, but she did that. So there were restrictions. There was a feeling that things were not going well. And there was one incident that, according to my sister, probably precipitated our second escape. The incident was 3 or 4 months, 1 or 2 months, I don't know. But at a certain point, the Germans decided to tell the Jews, please tell us all the diamonds you have and all the cash you have. Of course, they were going to kill us, and they wanted all of it. They wanted to know everything we had, and we declared it. But every Jew kept something back. We hid something in case we had to run away. There was an informer among the Jews, and the informer informed or squealed on my father and my uncle, the very first ones to be outed to the Germans. They said, those people have hidden money and have hidden diamonds in their apartments. They're lying to you when they said that this is all they have. My father and my uncle were in the diamond bourse, where they were told, tomorrow morning you must come and declare things to the people. In the diamond business, every night you lock up your diamonds in the safe at the very bottom of the building and you go home. And then you come back in the morning and you pick up your diamonds and you take them upstairs to do business. You don't take your diamonds home. So the next morning when they came to go pick up their diamonds, there was a German there, and he said, we have heard that you have hidden diamonds and cash. And indeed, my Uncle Gil had done so that very morning. He had hidden a $200 bill and something else into a drawer in his apartment. But he decided to bluff it out. He said, no, we told you everything we could. And the family tale is, he said, I'm like a beautiful woman. Once I show you everything, there is no more to show. He was a joker. The German did not appreciate the joke. But my father and my uncle were forced to stay there all day long until the German was going to accompany them and search the apartment. And my uncle knew he would find that diamond, or he would find the money. When others came to pick up their goods, my Uncle Gil whispered quickly to one of them, "Tell my grandmother, bodek the chametz, clean the chametz," which every Jew does right before Passover. That was a signal for, he saw that my grandmother had seen him put this away, for her to clean out the goods. This man, named Horowitz, he was afraid to go to my uncle's apartment, afraid the Germans would be there, they'd catch him. He walked around the building a few times, saw no Germans, came upstairs to the, I was told, third floor, and said, "Clean out the chametz." And Bubishi said, "I remember, I saw him put something away." So she went to that drawer, took the money and the goods, went to a greengrocer who was a personal friend, who was around the corner from our building, and said to him, "Please hold on to this. We'll ask for it back later, but please hold on to this." She went back. Later in the day, they came, the German soldier, searched my father's apartment. He had nothing hiding. Then went immediately to Uncle Giel's apartment and searched that apartment. When Uncle Giel walked in, my grandmother nodded to him imperceptibly, so he knew everything's okay. They won't find anything. They searched, they got angry, they sat down. My Uncle Haskell was coming at 6 that evening with more goods and more cash. They didn't know that. At one point, finally, the German said, "I'm tired of waiting," and he left before Uncle Haskell came. And we were saved that time. This happened to many other Jews, and the other Jews had to pay money to the Germans. The Germans didn't care whether they found anything. Since we were the first, we were very lucky. They let us off totally free.
But the diamonds and the money that was in the bourse, that was taken.
No. Well, again, I found out that my uncle left something like $15,000, which would be the equivalent of several $100,000 now, in there. They didn't want to run when they ran. I'll explain later. They didn't want to run with those goods. They were willing to sacrifice that money that is in there, because if they grabbed it, anyway, they left a lot of money back in the bourse, a lot of diamonds back in the bourse, but they also smuggled a lot with them in the heels of shoes and in the handles of silverware.
How did they get it in the handles of silverware, do you know?
Silverware in Europe is heavy, leaden. The handle of a knife is quite heavy. They hollowed out the knives, stuck diamonds in the knives. They, of course, the standard heel of shoe as well.
It's quite amazing. Can we go back, though? I want to talk about where you said life was relatively normal in Antwerp under the German occupation. There had to be some other nuisances. Can you think of any others?
No, I can't think of nuisances, and I need to explain a bit. The Germans didn't want to spook the Jews in the Belgian population because they needed their output. The Belgians were creating bombs, the Belgians were creating butter, it is best for the occupying forces to leave the occupation as gentle as possible so the occupying forces can cull what they need from the money being made by the people there. So they did not harass us. On any given day, we probably didn't even see them. It was, as I keep telling people, at one point, a French novelist in the late 1800s went to France because he wanted to write about German occupation of France in the late 1800s. Each time they said to him, "Remind me, when was it that the Germans were occupying us?" You don't, as a citizen, meet the occupying forces. You get up, you eat breakfast, you go to work, you come home, you go to sleep. Occupying forces? Nothing at all.
They weren't walking around in uniform. You didn't see Nazi uniforms, Nazi flags in Antwerp. Nothing that would
scare you. No. I mean, for instance, yes, it's scary because Bubishi was scheduled to be shipped out. My Uncle Giel went to the German commander and said, "What is this? They're shipping out my mother." He said, "No, we won't do it." So they didn't ship her out. So we were aware they were there. We were aware that certain things were not correct, and certain people did run away.
Ship her out to where?
They ran to Paris, they ran...
No, but when you're saying that the Germans said we're going to ship her out...
It wasn't clear as to where. It's just that she was one of the people being shipped out.
But there had to be tremendous anxiety and tension knowing
Well,
that
the
they
tension
could just
would be.
say, we're going to ship you out.
They stopped it. Tension gone. It's hard to imagine.
Yes, it is hard to imagine.
But they did not run away. They did not feel personally threatened.
Okay. But at some point you decided that it was time
Yes.
to leave Antwerp.
But that was because of Uncle Benno. We had heard rumors that they were rounding up the Jews. So clearly they were not rounding up the Jews in Antwerp, Belgium. But we heard rumors they're rounding up the Jews elsewhere, sending them places. We don't know where.
Was Uncle Benno in Antwerp? Or?
Yes,
Okay.
Uncle Benno was in Antwerp. He
But
was
he heard
part
this.
of the diamond community. Uncle Benno was married to my mother's sister. So he was a direct uncle, Tante Fanny, and Uncle Benno. And Uncle Benno was, as I mentioned, he was the handyman who managed to get into the basement. He was a very brave man. And he decided, I've got to go to Paris. I've got to find out if these rumors are right. And he was risking his life. We were not allowed to leave Antwerp, Belgium. So you say, are there restrictions? You can't get on a train and leave. After 7 p.m., everything is closed up. But even at 4, you can't get on a train and leave Antwerp, Belgium. You are confined to Antwerp.
So you were confined to the Jewish community in Antwerp.
We were confined to the Jewish community, but confined. That's where we lived anyway. So it was no big deal to be confined. But he decided to check out the rumors. It's a 2-hour ride, 3-hour train ride. And he got to Paris and he found out, yes, they're rounding up Jews. There was one country he heard about that was still accepting Jews, Albania. For all strange reasons, this was 1941, Albania was still accepting Jews. Uncle Benno went to the Albanian ambassador and said, I hear you're accepting Jews. Could you please give me passports to your country? He said, I just heard the other day that there is no more, we are not allowed to allow any more Jews into our country. And this was at the time of the final solution. They came up with a final solution. I'll comment on that in a minute. But in any case, when the Albanian ambassador said, no, I can't let you in, my Uncle Benno dropped to his knees, started crying, pleaded with the man to tell him where he can get false passport papers, something to get us out of Antwerp, Belgium. The Albanian ambassador relented, told him, gave him directions on what to do, and he went and did it, and he felt an obligation to all the Jews back in Antwerp, Belgium.
Uncle Benno.
Uncle Benno did. 3 weeks after, and I don't know why it was 3 weeks, but 3 weeks after he disappeared, he walked through the front door of my mother's apartment and said, you must all leave. My mother said it was like seeing a ghost. I thought I would never see him again in my life. He came back to warn all of us. So he said at that point, and this was in April, May of 1941, you've got to run. If you don't run, you are dead people. So we all started packing up. Again, even at that point, my father didn't want to go. His answer was, I'm safe here. I don't feel threatened here. If I go on the run, I'm a man on the run. They might shoot me. They might kill me. I'm not going. My grandmother, Bubushi, said, you're going. My father always had other people helping him, and the other people packed him up and made sure that he would be one of those running from Antwerp, Belgium, trying to get away. The story is we were delayed by 1 day because of wet laundry. My mother's laundry was on the line. Everybody was leaving today. She said, no, I can't leave because of the wet laundry. I told this story to my class, and my mother was in the class when I told the story. She laughed self-consciously and said, I didn't think we were in danger. I didn't think it was that terrible, which answers your question. Didn't the Jews know? She thought, no, it's not that dangerous. She waited for the laundry to dry. Then we shipped our luggage, and our luggage got lost. So therefore, we were not able, when the whole group that had escaped to Paris got on trains and left and escaped, we couldn't. Because of the laundry, the luggage was delayed. Because the luggage was delayed, which contained the diamonds, we could not run with all of them. My Uncle Gil said, I can't wait. The ground is burning under my feet. I must run away. You will join us. So he escaped, made it through. when we tried to escape, we didn't make it through. So I can tell you that story.
Well, first I want to ask now, so the Gestapo at this point was not in Antwerp. Those were not the ones.
No.
Who was it that you said the army was there?
I think it was called the Wehrmacht. But it was not, and the Wehrmacht did not like the Gestapo. The Gestapo were a select group of rather mean human beings, as you well know. In any case, the Wehrmacht did not. The group that was in charge of Belgium protected the Jews as much as they could. As I've mentioned, or I'll now mention, the guy in charge, the German in charge of all of Belgium, was one of those who eventually tried to kill Hitler and was himself killed. So he was a moderate, and he ran Belgium in a moderate way. He did not harass the population.
Okay. So now everybody but your immediate family, your entire extended family, with the exception of your immediate family, Shlomi's and Sarah's family, were now still in Antwerp. Everybody else left for Paris.
Yep. And we got to Paris, and then we tried to run away.
Was your brother Paul still with you?
No.
Please tell me before we move
Paul,
on.
yes. Paul's story is, remember, we were split. There was my father and my brother, and then Miriam.
This was in Calais.
In Calais. We were split apart on the road to Calais. So I told you, my mother, my sister, and I came to Calais. My brother not. My brother was with my father further back, not there yet. When he got to Calais, there were ships there taking people to England. So my brother and Aunt Zipporah and Aunt Humcha, two aunts with their children, were going to try to get on the boats that were evacuating people. There was a huge evacuation in Dunkirk, but there was also a minor evacuation in Calais. They went to the waterfront to try to get on the boat. My cousin with the photographic memory remembers it was the city of Christchurch, the British boat that was in the harbor. I've done research, and indeed, they were in Southampton, where I now live part of the time. They went from Southampton to Calais to pick up people. But by the time we wanted to get on the city of Christchurch, they were no longer taking anything but British troops. A little further down the bay, or down the waterfront, was a small boat that was taking women and children from Calais to Folkestone. Tante Humcha and Tante Zipporah, Humcha with her husband, Haskell, and two kids, Paul Kaufman, Big Paul, and Morris Kaufman. Big Paul was then 16, and he was tall. He got on the boat. The boat owner said, no, you're not a woman, you're not a child, you have to get off. Morris got on the boat, fine. Humcha got on the boat, Zipporah and her two daughters got on the boat, fine. According to Zipporah, Paul was alone with the maid called Malka or something. But according to others, my father and Paul were there, and my father decided he's got to save his son. It is important that at least his son be on the boat. So he put Paul on the boat with Humcha and Zipporah, and they were headed to Folkestone.
Your mother didn't know about this?
Nope.
So when your father arrived in Calais, he told her, he had sent Paul.
Paul was sent to England on a boat. His story is a long story. I don't know if you'll ask me about it, but he escaped to England. I'll tell you about that later.
But perhaps we'll get to Paul. But I want to continue the story now. So the rest of the family is on their way to Paris. You are still
in Belgium.
In Belgium.
Then we go to Paris.
Okay. Now, tell me a bit about exit visas. You do need a visa to get to Paris, do you not?
No, we were not allowed to go to Paris. We were not allowed to leave Antwerp, Belgium. But in order to leave German-occupied territory, what you needed is proof that some country in the world wanted to accept you, and that's where Santo Domingo said that it would accept thousands and thousands of Jews. So there was a place that said it would accept the Jews. However, you needed what laissez-passer, papers that allowed you to leave the occupied territories. So they were trying to get laissez-passer papers, and they got them. And there was some question of pink, red, I'll explain in a second. But in essence, we had these papers that said we could leave German-occupied territory. This is the time to say it. Hitler did not want to kill the Jews. He just wanted them to leave. He wanted all their goods and all their worldly material things, but he was not set on killing them. Just get away. But what he found out is the rest of the world had quota on Jews, and therefore he couldn't get rid of them. The final solution was literally how to get rid of this garbage. The rest of the world does not want this garbage. I will kill it. So they set out to kill the Jews because the rest of the world had quotas. And I have to say, I understand. What if all of China said he wanted to come to America? America would say no. So all the Jews wanted to come to America. America said no, and Spain said no. Not Spain, but all those countries said no, no Jews. So we needed these papers. We found someone to create these papers. We paid him tons of money. He created false papers. There were papers that he sold to everybody which were not valid. But the Germans did not know they were not valid. There was a new one being instituted that was a different color. So the one that they had got my Uncle Giel through, got all of my family through. But when, as I will explain, we got to the border, one guy had the new papers, and when the Germans jailed him for having the new papers, he kept quiet, because if he had pointed out that his papers were the valid paper, all the Jews would be immediately rounded up with the wrong papers. When my father got to the border, he was told, you've got the wrong papers. They now know it's the wrong papers. Cut them up, flush them down the toilet. You cannot get through on these papers. You're going to have to run through at the border on your own, risking life and death. You don't have the proper papers.
All right, so your family was able to get papers, whether they were the correct papers or not, to get out of Belgium.
Yep.
But now you needed papers to get into, you needed...
Santo Domingo. Santo Domingo gave us the papers, and they were valid papers, so we had those papers. All the Jews had valid entry papers to Santo Domingo.
But you were going to Paris. From Calais, you were going...
No, from Antwerp, Belgium.
From Antwerp.
From Antwerp, Belgium, we got on the train, went to the train. That's when the luggage was delayed. So all of them went. We stayed in Paris. When the luggage arrived in Paris, took a couple of days, we then went hundreds of miles south to Hendaye, Hendaye, which was on the border to Spain, with the assumption that we'll just give them the papers, we'll get on a train, we'll go to Spain. And that's when they found out, you got the wrong papers.
Okay. So now, where are we? The family was split up again. You're waiting for your luggage. You go to Hendaye.
Yeah.
And now from Hendaye.
Okay, several stories in Hendaye, but the essential thing is my father saw that people with the wrong papers. He was on a hill. He saw Jews being taken off the train with the wrong papers. He knew he's got to try to smuggle himself through. So he paid a smuggler to smuggle me, all of us, my sister, my mother, me. And in that group of people trying to run through to Spain were two airplane pilots, British pilots, who had been strafing French territory, who were trying to escape back to England. When there's a soldier going back and forth, he turned around, a motorcycle guy, caught all of us. Because he caught my mother and my sister and I and my father with British prisoners of war, or what would become prisoners of war, the whole group was taken to Mérignac, which was about 150 kilometers north of Hendaye. We were all thrown into a prisoner of war camp. We were the only family in the prisoner of war camp. There was my mother. There might have been another.
This is Mérignac. Where is it near? It's a prisoner of war camp. Do you know where?
It's near Bordeaux.
Bordeaux. So
in fact, it's because, well, anyway, it's near Bordeaux, and I know that because We were there for a week, and I was told I was starving to death. I was in terrible shape. Miriam thinks she caught trachoma there. She got an eye, which was solved later on, but probably she caught it there. There were no women and children there. I think there might have been another family called the Schwergold family that escaped with us. Mm-hmm. But we were the only women and children in that prisoner of war camp. Conditions there were horrific. The rabbi of Bordeaux interceded with the Germans and said, let those people go. It's a prisoner of war camp. It's not for children. It's not for women. Let them go. They agreed, and they sent us on a train to Camp Lalande-des-Monts.
It sounds very fancy. I'm sure
Yeah.
it was not. Okay. Tell us about that camp, please. It was Camp, I'm going to spell it. Camp, D-E, new word, L-A, new word, L-A-N-D-E, new word, D-E, new word, M-O-N-T-S.
Yeah, Mons is the city it's near. Camp de Lalande-des-Monts. And we were...
Let's stop for a minute, because I think we've missed a few points. You've spoken about Marignac. That was considered only a prisoner of war camp. Now, where were you caught? Trying to cross the border into Spain at this point?
Hendaye, yeah.
Hendaye was...
That's when we were trying to cross the border to Spain, and then they took us to Marignac.
Okay, so that Marignac was not that far.
130 kilometers, 150 kilometers.
Okay. Please tell us about Camp de Lalande-des-Monts.
Okay. That was a forced residence camp, and it's exactly what it says, forced residence. All the men were in a bungalow, all the women and children were somewhere else, all the teenagers were somewhere else. So we were all split apart and my father was made to work. All the men were made to work digging trenches or whatever it was. And my father was a weak man, but a good friend of his, Avram Leza, was an ox of a man, and he did my father's work for him. So my father and he went out to work together, and Avram Leza did the work. My sister remembers that they were marched around singing La vie est rose, la vie est belle. It's one of those ironies. Life is wonderful. They're all the teenage girls and all the people there. And Lalande-des-Monts Camp de Lalande-des-Monts did not have a wire fence. We were allowed to walk out up to a mile away from the camp. We were allowed to walk around.
There were guards?
This was, by the way, a French camp, not a German camp, I found out recently. It was the French who ran the camp. We were allowed to walk out on Saturdays and Sundays. We were not oppressed. It's just that we were kept residents there. And there's a history of men disappearing, not families, but men just left the camp and never heard of again. So people did manage to escape. No fence, no real...
They weren't taken away. It was assumed they escaped.
They escaped.
Okay.
Therefore, my father knew we would be killed. He knew from all his experiences, we've got to get away from here. So early on, he made plans. What he decided is he and this other family called the Schwergold family had a son my age, roughly 2, a daughter Miriam's age, Sabine Schwergold, who was there in the camp with us. So he made a plan that every Sunday he would walk to the nearby town, he and Mr. Schwergold. First 5 weeks, a French motorcycle guy followed them to make sure they weren't running away.
You could just go into a town.
We could go into a town. So we went into that town 5 weeks in a row. Then my father noticed that the motorcycle man stopped following him. The following Sunday happened to be August 10th, 1941. My sister's birthday is August 8th. He said to my sister, I'm going to give you a present. It's not a physical present, but it's the best present I can ever give you. We are going to have, quote, a birthday party for you. So he told all of us, he managed to get the French to agree to allow us to have a birthday party on Sunday, August 10th. Then he told my mother, you and Henry, you walk here and meet us. Don't go to the birthday party. Walk outside of this. There's no fence. and you will meet us there. Miriam and Sabine, you too. And Miriam remembers, I was scared. I'm supposed to walk on my own, but they walked on their own. All the families met on August 10th, 1941, and then walked to that small town, got on a train and headed to Tours. So we escaped to Tours on that day. But when we got to Tours, and a family sheltered us in Tours, a Jewish family, I think, we had no supplies. So we went in to get supplies, and on Sundays, I think it was...
I have to stop for a minute, because the entire family and another family escaped on that day.
Yes.
You didn't escape that far away. You were a walking distance away. Nothing, nobody came at night, nobody came looking for you, no soldiers, no sirens, nothing.
There was no, and in fact, it's stranger than that. That very day when we went to get supplies, and what's open on Sundays is a bar grocery store. At the bar grocery store that Mr. Schwergold and my father walked into to get supplies, the head of the forced residence camp was sitting in that bar. He was facing the door, saw my father, saw Mr. Schwergold. One hard-to-believe story is Schwergold went right up to him, shook his hand, said hello, made believe nothing was wrong. The story I heard is both of them took a look at the head of that forced residence camp, turned around, walked out, and ran to the railroad station, which would take them to Tours. So they were scared out of their minds, and to this day we don't know if the alarm was sent and people were looking for us. Some speculation is we were the only women and children to escape. Maybe the head of the forced residence camp took pity on us, decided not to squeal on us. We thought they would come running for us. When we got to Tours, we went to the railroad station and we had tickets to go to Paris. We thought no, or they thought no. They will search the train looking for us. They know we escaped. They're going to search the train and look for us. We will not do that. We will stay in Tours overnight. And then we were hot goods, supposedly. The family we stayed with said, you got to go. I can't shelter you anymore in Tours. So they went to what they think was a farmer in the resistance. That night they went to a different place outside of Tours, were fed by this farmer, and that's when the third attempt to escape occurred. So we tried to escape that time. I'll talk about it in a second, but very kind farmer, probably part of the resistance. Tours is like 5 kilometers from Vichy, France, unoccupied France. So we had to run from occupied France to unoccupied France with, again, that border guard going back and forth. Speculation that he was paid to look the other way, but anyway, we ran and got to free territory. The story my sister remembers is, this was 3 o'clock in the morning, she was woken up and told to go, and we had to run up an embankment, through a field, etc. She said to my mother as we were running, I have to go to the bathroom. My mother said, go in your pants. My sister said that was the moment she realized this is very dangerous.
Right.
I've never been told to go in my pants. The second story is there were 2 children. The Schwergold child, 2, me 2. I was a good kid. I wasn't going to scream. However, the Schwergold child was a fussy kid who kept screaming. So one of the smugglers had the Schwergold child in his arm, bag of candy in his right eye. Every time the Schwergold kid opened his mouth, in went the candy. So they made sure that he would not cry. But we got through.
So you got through from Tours
to Vichy, France.
Okay,
And
now you're in Vichy. How long did you stay in Vichy?
We went to Nice. That's where we stayed in Vichy, France. We stayed at a hotel. Again, as you will ask me, and I will tell you, it's money. We had money. We had diamonds.
I have to ask that question because there was, you call it kindness of some of the German soldiers. Now you're in a hotel in France. Let's talk about the money. Clearly, the money that your uncle had put aside and that your father had put aside had come in very handy.
Yeah, and in fact, I didn't mention this, but they had sent money to America, knowing they might end up there. So we had money spread out in several places in case we had to run. So we were aware that there was danger and that we might have to run. So we stayed at a hotel, a very nice hotel in Nice. I don't know what hotel. And the owners of the hotel were anti-Semitic. However, 2-year-old or 3-year-old Henry at that time and was cute, and they liked us. They liked Miriam, they liked me. And my father, when he was in Nice, tried to find the right papers to get us into Spain. And he did finally hunt around, and we were there perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3, I don't know, at the hotel. And then we finally managed to find the right papers that put us on a train, perfectly legitimate, the train leaving Vichy, France, and going into Spain. So we had the right papers. We managed to escape.
And now the family is in Spain.
Yes, and we're in Spain, but we still don't have...
Now, who is with you at this point? Which part of the family? Your immediate family, but not your brother Paul?
No, not my brother Paul. And as far as I can tell, no other family. Schwergolds, no, they weren't there. So it was just my
None
father.
of the uncles, Giel, had already gone?
Nope.
Okay, so it was just Shlomi?
Sarah, my mother, Miriam, and me. That's it.
Okay, and your father was able to book passage
On a train
on a train.
that headed into Spain. Once he got to Spain, he went to Madrid, and from Madrid he went to Bilbao. Bilbao
Did you go with him? Were you, did the family
we
travel?
Yeah, we're all traveling. We stayed in Madrid maybe a night, maybe 2, I don't know, and headed to Bilbao. From Bilbao, my father scoured trying to find the correct papers to get us on the train. He went to Madrid, so he traveled hundreds of miles looking for people that would give him the correct papers. And of course, he paid money. That's the only way that we could get them. So he finally got them in Madrid. During this hunt, I was told, he was so weak because he had just escaped this forced residence camp, he fainted on the streets. People revived him and helped him, and he then went on. But this was desperate times as he was trying to get out of Vichy, France, into Spain. And he did.
Okay. So now your father was able to book passage on a ship. You were leaving Nice. Please tell us.
There were only 2 ships, it turns out, that were leaving to go from Spain to South America. Stop on the way at Cuba. But in any case, it is the Magallanes, the Marqués de Comillas, Magallanes. I think that there's a... Anyway, that ship and another ship, that's the one my father finally booked passage on to take us to South America. Now remember, my Uncle Giel had already gone, and when he was on his way to Santo Domingo, they stopped in Cuba. And just for refueling or whatever it is, you bribe the authorities in Cuba, you manage to stay in Cuba. What 3 dictators, Batista, Trujillo, and Franco, helped the Jews in World War II. It was the 3 dictators, Franco in Spain, Trujillo in Santo Domingo. And Batista, what he did is, he gave his friends entry permits to come, his very good friends, here's an entry permit for a Jewish family. When a Jewish family wants to get in, you can sell it to them. It's not a bribe, you're getting money for these papers. So they got money, Uncle Giel and all the other family that ended up in Cuba. Uncle Benno was there, everybody was there, and we were latecomers. So we finally got on the Magallanes, got to Cuba. In the harbor, Uncle Giel had already hired a boat to meet us. So he hired a boat, got us off the ship, got us into Cuba, where we lived for 5 years.
So you were headed to Santo Domingo, but met by Uncle Giel. And so you're not saying Batista was being kind to the Jews. He was selling.
He was selling.
He was giving his friends these visas to sell.
Exactly. But what he found out is these Jews are in the diamond business. They set up a diamond business in Cuba. We're doing very well. So he was very pleased with what was going on. He let as many Jews in as managed to get there. But you had to pay money in order to get there.
All right. So let's just talk about arriving in Havana. You said you stayed at the Ellis Island of Cuba,
Tiscornia.
Discordia. Do you have any description of that?
No, I have no memory whatsoever of it. But again, I was told that at Tiscornia were something like 100 Jews that had come on this ship, the Magallanes, trying to get into Cuba. And some of them did not have the money to bribe authorities. And what they did, the Jews did, is they pooled their money, asked how much money would it cost to get all of us in. You're not going to deal with us individually. They financed everybody to get into Cuba. So we paid a bribe, and all the people in Tiscornia simply went to Cuba and lived in Havana. I've read that after us or before us, Tiscornia was a problem. They held the Jews there for months, didn't let them out. That was not our experience.
Was it because too many Jews were coming to Cuba at that point?
Don't know.
But there was a big Jewish community there during...
Before the war, there might have been dozens of family, maybe 2 dozen, 3 dozens. During the war, there were a minimum of 300 families in Havana, Cuba. There were 2 synagogues that were functioning at the time. So we went there. We went to only one of the 2 synagogues. When we first got to Cuba...
How old were you, by the way, when you arrived in Cuba?
4.
Let's get something. You were 4, so this was 1942.
Yep. And in fact, the first thing I remember in my entire existence was in Cuba, hiding behind my father. My father was walking into the apartment of Uncle Gil, and I was scared of Uncle Gil, so I ran behind my father. At this point, it's a memory of a memory. But that's the first thing I remember. We're in Cuba, we're in an apartment, we're living with Uncle Gil and his family.
So I was going to ask, who is there now? Still not your brother Paul?
No, he was not there yet.
All right, so who is with you in Cuba?
In Cuba, there was Uncle Gil and Tante Charlotte and Big Henry and Ruthie. That family was there already. All the other families, Uncle Benno was there, the Kaufmans were there, they were all there, and they were all separate apartments. But Uncle Gil's apartment was large enough for me, my sister, my mother, and my father, and we lived there almost a year until my brother arrived. I'll describe why.
But I want to say,
Yeah.
so the group that you started with, somehow many of them had managed to get themselves to Cuba.
Yes.
Did you know about what happened to the others?
I'm just remembering now, actually Uncle Benno went to South America, not to Cuba. A few of the others ended up in South America, in Santo Domingo, but eventually in Brazil and Argentina. So a branch of my family has been there for 50 years, 40 years. Only recently did they leave and go to Israel. But yes, we knew about them there. Mail worked during World War II, so we were in touch with each other. Every time when my brother landed when Chomcha and my brother landed in England, they sent letters to the rest of the family to say, we are safe. So we knew about where people are. We used some kind of code every once in a while so people wouldn't understand what they were reading, but we knew about each other.
Surely. You were from a huge family. I know you didn't know, other than the 4 younger groups. Did anyone not survive?
Yes. On the boat was Malka, there was one Pressberg family, Malka Pressberg. Again, 3 of her sons were killed in concentration camps.
She was a cousin?
Yes.
Okay.
They died in concentration camps. I mean, I was told the story of one of them was a wise guy, so when he got there, they said, this group works, this group does not work. He thought, I'll go to the group that doesn't work. That was the gas chamber. So he was killed. Back in Antwerp, Belgium, there was Bubishi. This is the lady who produced 11 children. She said, I can't run. I'm too old. I'll slow you down. I will stay here, and I will not run. She was killed. We didn't know details until the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum in Israel saw her name there among those deported and killed in a concentration camp, probably Auschwitz. I don't know.
So in Cuba, You still didn't have all of that information.
No, no, we didn't know about them. We didn't know about my mother's mother, which is another story. But my mother's mother stayed there because she had one crippled son, and she didn't want to abandon the crippled son. So she stayed with the crippled son. He fell, killed himself. He was in a wheelchair, and somehow he fell and killed himself. She was bereft. This is, again, not Bubashi, but Bomama, my mother's mother. And my mother's mother didn't know what to do. We heard this story later. She went to a train station or a tram station and was weeping copiously. And a woman approached her and said, "What's wrong?" And my Bomama told her the story. This woman turned out to be a prostitute who hid my grandmother in the attic for 2 years of World War II, while she and her friends serviced the German soldiers on the bottom floors. She would have been killed if they knew that a Jew was up there. She saved my Bomama, who later joined us in New York City.
Oh, she didn't come to Cuba. She later joined you in New York.
She joined us in New York City after the war.
All right, so many people in your family did not survive, the ones who were not able to escape.
Yes, but it's like a handful when you think there might be 60 or 70 members.
Yes, yes.
6 of them, 8 of them died. Oh, I forgot the other story, one who didn't make it, and it's a tragic story. When they all decided they have to run, Uncle Benno came back and said, "You've got to run." Tzipora, an aunt, a direct aunt, my father's sister, had a husband, Shmuel Mund. And remember, you don't know, I didn't tell this. Tzipora was on that boat that took my brother to England. Tzipora and her kids, but not her husband. Her husband was a full-grown male, was not a lot on there. He went back to Antwerp, Belgium with all of us. When we escaped, he didn't have the money to escape. They said, "We'll lend you the money, Shmuel, we'll lend you the money." He's too proud. He said, "No, I don't want it." He tried to escape with, it doesn't matter who, but he tried in Switzerland. When he got to Switzerland and crossed the border, the Swiss threw him out. They put him right back into German-occupied territory, and he died in the camps.
All right, so let's get back to your family life in Cuba. Can you describe it for me, please?
Very much like Antwerp, Belgium. We were the upper classes. We did...
So you still had money, you had the diamonds, you had...
How in heaven's name they had all that money? I don't... Well, they had lots of money. At one point, my Uncle Gil tried to cash a $1,000 American bill, which turned out to be a counterfeit. But obviously, they had diamonds, they had cash. They received diamonds and cash, not diamonds, but cash from America. Some of the family was already in America. They sent us cash, so we did live well. Again, what's the situation? When my father came to Cuba, he wanted to open a factory. The Cuban officials came and said, "Yes, you can open a factory, but you have to bribe us." My father, the very moral man, said no. He never got to open a factory in Cuba. Uncle Gil said, "Yeah, how much do you want?" So Uncle Gil opened a factory, and my father worked for Uncle Gil at his factory, and my father also worked at home.
Diamond business still?
Yep. In one room of our house in Cuba, I have vivid memories of my father at a spinning wheel working on diamonds. So he couldn't go and open his own factory, but he worked for my uncle, and he cut diamonds in the house.
Was there a thriving diamond business in Havana at that time?
Yes, it became thriving because we were all there. So it was an extremely good business. We did well. What I remember, and I'm having more memories from there because I'm between 4 and 9, is a Cuban maid with like 10 kids or whatever. But she was the poor class. They took care of us. I remember an apartment overlooking the main avenue in Cuba. What I remember about it is very few cars, and you could tell what car was the president's car. The president's car had license plate 1, vice president license plate number 2. So my friend and I used to be on the balcony looking to see who we could see. We never saw 1. We saw number 2, we saw number 5. But it was a pleasant life, an easy life.
You went to school?
I went to several schools. We knew we were coming to America. The object always was to come to America. So there was an American school called Ruston Academy. And all of us ended up going to Ruston Academy learning English from British teachers. So the British teachers would, I had a British accent at first because I was...
Let me stop you here for a minute. I should have. So you're learning English in Cuba from a British teacher. What were you all speaking at this
Once
point?
again, Yiddish. However, I was going to school with Cuban students, and supposedly I was fluent, absolutely fluent in Spanish. I knew Spanish. I was terrific at it. In fact, there's some story that I even
Well,
got...
wait, now let's go back a little bit. You weren't fluent in Spanish when you arrived.
No.
You were about 4 years old when you arrived.
Yep.
What was everyone speaking then? Still just Yiddish?
Yiddish. I mean, we wouldn't speak French, and we might speak French. Every once in a while I would hear French in the family. But basically, Yiddish was the language.
So you arrive in Cuba. You go to a Jewish community.
There was, as I said, 2 synagogues. Yes, all of life was led in the Jewish community. I have vivid memories of summer camps where we were there, all the Jews together, of plays being put on during Purim time and other time. We were a community to ourselves. My brother went to Jewish camps, and he was active in pro-Israel movement at the time. My sister, I have pictures of him in a Boy Scout uniform kind of thing. We lived in the Jewish community. We thrived. We went to summer resorts, but all within the Jewish community.
So initially when you arrived, everybody was speaking Yiddish. You were too. You went to school. You learned English.
And Spanish.
And Spanish. So do you recall, as you got a little bit older, you were going to school, you were going to camps. What were the children speaking to one another?
I'm sorry, the children in the family, the
you and your friends at camp, at school.
Spanish.
Spanish was the language.
Yes, I mean, we really learned Spanish.
Were you mixed in with other children, or were you going primarily to Jewish schools?
No, we were mixed in with the Ruston Academy was not a Jewish school.
Okay.
I mean, my mother remembers it was the school for the diplomats. So when I had my 5th or 6th birthday party, all the children came to my birthday party, came in limousines. The limousine came to the front door, dropped the kid off, limousine left. At the end of the party, the limousine came to pick them up. So we were living with the very rich, with the diplomats. Our house was like 4 blocks away from the theater. We were in the very heart of downtown Havana, Cuba. I remember even, now it's coming back to me, I was in a play in Havana, Cuba, and the play was filmed and parts of it was put in movie theaters. I remember going to a movie theater and seeing me among 50 other kids on screen screaming, "That's me, that's me." So it's the upper classes. We were the ones others watched. Somebody once said, television isn't something you watch, it's something you appear on. And that's exactly what the kind of family we were. We had the money, we went to the resorts. I remember riding on horses in some resort. I could even look up the name of it, but I can't think of it right now.
But it still must have been a combination of Yiddish, English, Spanish, and the younger generation surpassing the older people.
Yes.
So at home, it was strictly Yiddish.
Strictly Yiddish. I mean, my sister was very angry at me because when I came to America, I stopped speaking Spanish altogether and immediately picked up English. I've lost everything of Spanish. I can get it back if I am amidst Spanish speakers. But she was astonished that I would forget. She spoke French, Flemish, Yiddish, Hebrew, and English. I mean, she was multilingual. In my family, if you come to a gathering, on this corner they're speaking French, and that corner they're speaking Flemish, and that corner they're speaking Spanish. So it's many languages, but not me. I stuck to English.
Okay, that must have been interesting. All right, tell me about the Jewish life in Cuba. Did your family celebrate in any way?
Yes, because again, I have only what my friend calls flashbulb memories, where you suddenly see a scene but nothing around it. So a flashbulb memory that I have is being in shul, synagogue, it's Purim, and I'm making noise, because every time Haman,
Haman.
yeah, you start making Mordechai and Haman, and you start making noise. And I was so pleased I could make noise in the synagogue. So I made a ton of noise. But the synagogue was the center of our lives. We went there every Saturday. We worshiped there. My father was turning religious. So
Why do you think your father was turning religious?
Why?
You said he hadn't been religious before.
Perhaps the Germans made him religious. They made him realize that Judaism is something he needs to keep, because among all those languages, I forgot to add, I was learning Hebrew.
In Cuba?
In Cuba. My father paid me $1 for every word, some amount of money for learning the Hebrew alphabet. So I learned it very quickly because I could get some money out of it. So I was learning Hebrew, which I studied with my father every Saturday, the Parsha of the week. And to again reinforce Yiddish, I translated the Hebrew to Yiddish. So sometimes I get it wrong because I didn't know the Yiddish word, and my father would hit me because I got the wrong word. And it's not that I got the wrong word. I didn't know Yiddish well enough. But I knew Hebrew well enough to translate it into Yiddish.
Did your family celebrate the holidays, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, all of that?
Yes.
So the area, the Jewish community was an observant Jewish community.
Yes.
In Cuba. Okay, but yet it sounds like there was a very good life in Cuba, but the goal was to come to the United States.
Yes, the goal was to come to the United States. It's the country everybody wanted to go to. We didn't want to stay in Batistas, Cuba. I mean, that was simply a stop-off point on our way to America. But we wanted to come to America. Everybody did. That was the goal.
And why could they not have come sooner?
There was just been a 3-part series on television on
Yes.
how America had kept the Jews out, and that was our case. They kept us out. They didn't allow us in. The story was, my grandmothers were still in Europe. If we came to America, they could pressure us with, if that something will happen to your grandmother. Sorry, I'm saying it the wrong way. They were afraid that the Germans could pressure the people in America to tell them stories because they were afraid that their Jewish relatives would be harmed by the Germans. The Germans would threaten my bomama and my bubishi, and we would have to spy for them. That was the story. The story is, don't let these people in. They're vulnerable.
All right. How did your family, now you're 9 years old at this point.
I haven't told you how Paul came to Cuba. Do you want me to?
Oh, yes, please. Your brother Paul.
Okay. My brother Paul, remember, was in England, and he had his bar mitzvah in England, in London, and he was there with Aunt Humcha and her son, not Paul Kaufman, but Morris Kaufman. They heard we had made it to Cuba. They tried to come to Cuba. Unfortunately, many ships were being torpedoes on the water between England and Cuba. They had to pay massive sums of money. I mean, they paid money to the Greek shipping magnates who were then taking boats. They paid money, didn't work out. They paid more money, still didn't work out. Paid more money. Finally, they were the only non-merchant marine people on a flotilla of 27 boats that left England. 3 of the boats made it to Cuba, and my brother was on one of them. The other 24 were torpedoed. Oh. And what they did is they waited for storms. The whole flotilla would be spread out. It was being protected by some boats, but when the whole flotilla was spread out, the submarine people sunk those boats. I told you I was with my Uncle Gil in Cuba for 1 year. Why did we leave him? Paul finally arrived in Cuba. And Uncle Gil's son, Big Henry, was a bully. And he bullied all of us. When he bullied Paul, Paul said, don't do that. He did it again, Paul hit him. At that point, Aunt Charlotte said, I think you need a separate apartment. So we got a separate apartment. But for a year, we were living with them.
But your father was doing well at this point and had put money away.
Yes, he could afford it. He could afford it. So, yes. So you were asking me...
Well, now you're 9 years old, and you're going to America.
I had many dreams. They told me there were subways. I thought that you dig a hole in the ground, you crawl down there, and you go. So everybody told me you're going to America, and then you needed a sponsor back then. So we got sponsors in America who would say we would not be falling upon their system and being a drain on the system over there. They promised that they would take care of us. 1947, we flew by airplane from Havana, Cuba, to Florida. I remember I was afraid of being sick on the airplane. It was the first airplane ride ever. I forgot to say about Paul. I lost the story about Paul. Let me go back.
Please.
When he finally arrived, he didn't arrive in America. He arrived in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he...
Wait. I'm sorry. Paul arrived in Cuba.
I forgot part of it.
Oh, before Cuba.
The flotilla of boats kept to the northern part, trying to avoid being torpedoes. So they ended up in Canada. So they were in Canada for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And at that point, there were ships leaving, going to Cuba from Canada. My Aunt Humcha wanted to go, and my brother Paul wanted to go, but they were told, don't. The German soldiers are plying these sailors with booze, finding out when they sail and sinking them. So my Aunt Humcha kept saying to the man who housed us, a very kind man, I can't be an imposition on you. He said, don't go on those boats. Paul actually went to watch the boat that he was supposed to be going on sail, and he saw, before it went over the horizon, that a German U-boat torpedoed that boat and machine-gunned absolutely everybody who went onto the lifeboats. No one survived that boat. At that point, Paul was willing to take a train. And he took a train all the way from northern Canada to Florida. Then he joined us in Cuba. Then that happened, and we had our own apartment.
Right. And then all right, so now from Cuba, you were able to get your visas, and you all flew as a family, your first flight, 9 years old, to Florida, to Miami, I would assume, Miami Airport. It's not a very long flight.
No.
But it must have been to you. Do you remember your feelings? Do you remember arriving in the United States? Do you remember your father and mother's?
No.
No.
I have this, again, flashbulb memory of me on the tarmac in Cuba and Miami Airport. So I got there and hadn't thrown up and was very proud of that, but nothing else. Nothing.
You don't remember that at all. It's often such a big memory for people who arrive in the United States.
Nope.
But, all right. So, and it wasn't as though you were arriving to welcoming Jewish arms. It was just an airport
Exactly.
at that point.
Exactly.
And
We got on a train or whatever it is and went to New York City.
how long did you didn't stay in Florida at all?
No.
Okay. So it was, again, just your immediate family who flew to Miami. And then did anyone stay in Cuba?
No. Almost all of them migrated. In fact, as I told you, we lived with Uncle Gil in Cuba.
Yes.
When we came to America, we lived with Tanta Humcha, the mother of the guy with the photographic memory. We stayed in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, for 6 months until we got our own apartment on 162nd Street and Riverside Drive. But again, it's all within the Jewish community. So I have memories of Bensonhurst playing marbles. I have memories of Bensonhurst being with the family, but very vague. But then we went to 1940 and to 162nd Street and Riverside Drive, and that's the beginning of my life in America, and I remember that.
And you were 9, 10 years old at
Exactly.
this point still. And your parents are still speaking Yiddish.
Yes.
Never learned, did they ever
Yes, of
comfortably
course.
learn
My father learned Spanish. My mother learned Spanish. They had to deal with the people. And my father, a reader, a tremendous reader, so he read the newspaper every day. Yes, he knew English, but it was not the language he wanted to communicate in. And in fact, at one point I said, I want you to write me letters. He said, I will do that if you learn Yiddish. And I had to try to learn to read Yiddish. So my father was firmly in Yiddish. He learned all the languages of every country he entered into, but at home he spoke Yiddish.
And was he working here?
Yes, Yes, he was a diamond dealer here.
He was a diamond dealer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, they did very well on 47th Street, New York City.
Okay. And did anybody else from the family ever go into the business? Did it continue?
Paul, my brother Paul, was in the business all of his life, and I went into the business for 6 months, 8 months, and decided, no, I don't want it, so I left.
Okay.
But yes.
So here you are a family of, although you made it out quite safely and had a number of very good experiences. Here you are, a family of Holocaust survivors. Were you in Brooklyn? I imagine there were others.
Yes.
There were many. What about when you moved into New York?
When I moved into New York again, this was a Jewish community on Riverside Drive. I went to yeshiva. The minute I came back, I went to the 5th grade of yeshiva, and I went there until the 8th grade. So I was again within the Jewish community. I have vivid memories of walking to synagogue every Saturday, studying with my father every Saturday. But as I said earlier in this interview, no non-Jews. It was 22 before a girl I met in France, I invited her through the door. First time my father was ever rude to anyone. My father was the kindest human being on 2 feet. He was afraid I would marry this lady. So he was not kind. But we were in a Jewish community. That's it. That's all our friends.
And that's what you knew. So your father worked in the diamond business, which was predominantly Jewish, on 47th Street. Came home, you lived stayed within the Jewish community.
And my memory of that life was many, many get-togethers with 40 people in my living room, all members of my family, or 40 people on Kachil's living room. We socialized with each other. We socialized extensively. Point, even a Jewish friend of mine, whom I wanted to bring to a family reunion, my father would rather not have him. He's not a member of the family. Yeah. I mean, that's how strong the family ties were. A best friend who was Jewish, rather not have him for this.
Would you say that the memories of the escape of the 2 years really colored your life in the United States?
Colored my life or my parents' life?
Well, your parents' life. Let's start with your parents' life.
I'm sure it affected them. My father never mentioned a single thing about the escape. My mother never mentioned.
That's what I was getting at.
Yeah, they would not talk about it. Even when we were all together, nobody talked about it.
So growing up, you really never spoke about your experiences in Europe.
I'm very sorry. My sister's very sorry. We're all sorry that we did not grill our parents on that experience. My father was killed by a drunk driver in 1965, so
gosh.
I never got to talk to him about it. Not once. They never spoke about it. We never culled the memories. It took 30 more years before I started to go around and get people to tell me the story.
Even when you became aware of what had happened to other people during the Holocaust, I mean, surely in Cuba it was already 1945, 1946. You must have been aware of what was going on in Europe.
My sister claims that when they learned that Jews had been exterminated methodically, they were shocked out of their minds. So obviously they didn't know that it was a methodical extermination via concentration camps. They may have heard rumors, they may have been scared, they did not know.
And once they came to the States, living in a Jewish world, other people had similar stories and quite different stories.
Yes.
Quite more harrowing stories
Yes,
in many
yes,
ways.
yes.
But it was never something that was discussed with you and the family.
No. I'm sure that they talked amongst themselves when the children were not around of some of the experiences, because as you say, all the others around us were also survivors.
Yeah. So when did you first develop the interest in digging more deeply into your past, into your family's past?
I'm trying to think when I began.
You said you were the historian. You took it upon yourself to become the historian of the family. When did you recall when you did that? Were you...
I can't remember. I do remember that I started in a small way and started to get some stories from people, but then around the year 1995 or whatever, I became methodical. I decided, okay, Nobody else is going to tell this story. I'm going to go from relative to relative. Uncle Gil was still alive. Paul Kaufman was still alive. Miriam was still alive. There were many people who had direct memories, and I went around and called. I mean, I sat with a tape recorder. I sat with a piece of paper. And I remember Uncle Gil tell me, "Don't tell them about the handles of the knives. We may need it another day." So I'm there, asking people questions, trying to get the story.
All right. And your primary sources were Miriam, who was quite young when
Yes.
this all happened. She had
But-
an excellent memory.
Yes, she had an excellent memory. So my primary memory was her and Paul Kaufman. My brother Paul remembered almost nothing. His wife kept yelling at me that I'm not telling his story. She was not the favorite member of the family. But in any case, when my brother Paul, I went to Paul and I said, "Well, do you remember this? Do you remember that?" He could not. I mean, we have very little episodic memory, my family. Miriam did. I did not. Paul did not. When he told me he couldn't remember, I believed him.
Henry, you're 84. Who's left of your very large family? There were 11 children your babushi had.
Who's left is there's my cousin Ruth Kaufman, Uncle Gil's daughter.
She was around your age.
3-4 years older, around Miriam's age. She's still left. She's only a few blocks away, 5-7 blocks away. She's the only one of that generation. I kept thinking I'm the last survivor. Not quite. There's still her. But other than that,
And I would imagine there are children. You have children. Ruth has children.
Yes.
Must be children of your generation.
yes, they are all very thankful to me. They've sent me many notes on how nice it was that I managed to collect all these memories. They're very pleased that I did what I did. And I've sent books to all of them. So, yes, the next generation knows it was my son who set up this interview. He said, "I want my children to be able to see you telling this story." So it was he who is instrumental in all of this.
Wonderful. Are any of your children or the other family's children Jewishly involved?
Yes, but not my children. I married out of the faith. The others are. Many of them are. I mean, my sister's daughter is very deeply involved in it. Ruth's family is religious. And for instance, Kaufman, the guy, Paul Kaufman, I kept mentioning, he stayed religious, had 4 kids, all of whom are still religious. And there's a branch of my family that's Orthodox, that is Shabbat and emissaries to the world. So yes, some branches are still very religious, but most have integrated.
Okay. But they will have the story thanks to you. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us, anything that we haven't brought up in the interview?
No, I mean, I can't think of anything except I do want to emphasize that Hitler, in a sense, did not want to kill all the Jews. It was the whole world and that situation that created his final solution. So it was, the world is in part to blame, but I don't know what the world could have done. Could it have let every Jew who asked to come into it to settle in their country? I don't know.
What about today? Do you see any parallels?
Yes. I mean, it's frightening. There are parallels. I already think I might settle in England rather than America. I'm afraid of what's going on here. So I have the option to be able to settle in England, which is also anti-Semitic, but less so, less visibly so than America. So yes, I'm quite frightened for my future.
Well, let's hope.
Let's hope.
For better things, and I thank you very much
Thank
for
you for
meeting with us today.
Yes, thank you for having this interview. That's a wedding picture of my father and my mother, taken in Antwerp, Belgium, of course. My father was a diamond cutter, and his apprentice was my mother. He retired her by marrying her. That's a picture of my mother's mother and father. He too was in the diamond business, I learned, and he always used to run around so quickly they told him he'd get a speeding ticket unless he slowed down. And the mother is the one who was hidden by ladies of ill repute during World War II. The picture in the top left-hand corner is taken in 1945 at a photographic studio in Cuba. That's my brother Paul and me, small guy at the bottom right, and my sister Miriam. And the top right is a picture of my mother, and below that a picture of my father, and below that a picture of Bubishi, the very famous lady who had 11 children and lived in Antwerp, Belgium with all of us. This is a picture taken in Nice. We are on the run from the Germans, only a few days past the forced residence camp. That's the thinnest I've ever seen my father look. And we do look glamorous. My mother was always a glamorous woman. She loved the way she looked, and she took good care of that. But this is Nice, 1942, right before we managed to get to Cuba.